beached whale on the...
I'm thankful that God provides.
Professionals will be investing right now to help serve churches.
And let's talk about ministry, and let's talk about how we can serve God and do what God has us to do. Okay, so we are here with a session that deals with raising kids in camp. And we've got enough people here on the session that we're hoping for at least 2 pieces of good advice.
Mostly
two. Yeah, just and,
That's why
and
your
your advice is all good. So this is like one of those things that when you did it, you're like, okay, is this smart? Cindy is with me now, and that's always smart. But now I'm giving her a voice that everybody will hear, and so
He let me out.
I'm kind of excited about this. Cindy and I have done we've done a podcast maybe together, one.
Once.
Yes, but
Maybe
we
twice.
keep talking about doing more things, but we haven't yet. So let's do introductions. First of all, start on the end. Go ahead.
Scott Randolph from Camp Assurance at Georgetown, Illinois, and I've got 2 children now grown, 1 married and 1 hoping.
Okay. Now realize this goes out to everybody. I had to remind myself today. Okay, kids' stories are now on the internet, so I need to be careful right there. Next.
I'm Jon Bladine from Longview Camp. I have 4 kids, ages 5 months through 7 years old. I was going to be sitting out there, but somehow I got up here.
Now see, we have a bunch of people who are all old enough that will say something like, no, 2-year-olds were easy. And I don't remember any of that. And it's,
I don't remember any of
yeah,
that.
it's a form
I'm
of
here to help you.
Yeah. It's a form of PTSD, I think, that gets us to where we can't remember that. But John's right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
He's in the trench, so his voice counts at least twice as much as any of ours. And then Cindy's up here counting 3 or 4 times as much as the rest of us. So the peanut gallery, right here. Next.
I'm Cindy Brock, and we have 4 children that are all married, so and 4 grandchildren. So there you go.
Then next, go ahead.
Scott Olson from Chandler, Arizona, International Baptist College and Seminary. And we have 4 children from 22 to 32 and 2 grandchildren, and God's been good.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. Maybe you can help me out at the Wilds. So Scott and, or Cindy and I and Scott and Susan, we had staff kids, grew up together. I think Cheyenne wrote a note.
She was about 10. She wrote and said, I want to marry Micah, but I'm probably never going to get to.
Right.
And
so-
our children ended up getting married, so we share grandchildren.
Yeah, so staff kids grew up together, married, and so Scott's family. I don't advertise it, but we, and he doesn't advertise me either. But, we are family. Do you guys have anybody like that?
Never had a staff kid.
Really, never had staff kids get.
Not yet, but my son is hoping.
Remember, this goes around to the internet.
Yeah,
Oh, he's 7.
I
That's
think
real
Cheyenne
close
was
to
9,
Cheyenne.
so-
Okay, so this is a session. It's entitled 5 Things I've Learned About Raising Kids at Camp. John is not done raising his kids at camp, but kind of does the younger kid section here. And then I think all of us are old enough to know that nobody is perfect in this process, and nobody is guaranteed success. If you do 1, 2, 3, 4, then this is the outcome. We're dealing with the soul of a person who, by God's given, He gives them choices that are beyond our ability to control. Now, with several parents here who have adult children, we may want to be able to. What are you thinking? We did not teach that. And then there's times where you're like, okay, man, that just makes me proud. We did not teach that. And it's kind of this. There's just really interesting things that child training is not as simple and straightforward as you'd think it could be. So we thought that this would be the smaller session. We're up against program in the other session. And so the people that are here are really interested in the program that is okay, what about my own family? Not just the whole ministry I'm involved in, but what about the children? So once again, we'll try to open this up to questions or comments that are helpful, because this panel does not have all the answers, and I would look out at this panel out here and be like, man, I wish I could listen and hear from you. Now, I am past the point where we get to make some of the choices for our children, but I do think you've got to be real intentional, and it's a good thing to be able to listen to those who've kind of gone ahead and might have some ideas about it. Raise up fingers of the number of kids that you have in your home. Let me see. I want a quick count. So we got 3, 10, 13, 15, 18, 26, 29. Wow,
There's
two
nine right
hands.
there.
Yeah, 29,
be
38, 30, 39, 44, 47, 48, 50, 52, 50. Okay, 55, plus your, how many?
4.
4. Almost 60 kids represented in this group right now. There's one thing, I'm going to start it out here. I think the secret weapon that we have in camp is our children. I mean, we're talking about 60 kids. Can you imagine the impact on this world of 60 kids who grow up to serve God? Now, again, this is something that is our hope and what we would do, but I think it's so cool that we're trying to invest in the lives of 60. I'd be happy for any camp of 60 that shows up, and here in our homes daily is quite a crowd. So the things that we learn here, the things that we'll talk about, I think can have a huge impact on the future. So again, it's entitled Things I've Learned Raising Kids at Camp. Who would like to just start us off? It's a wide topic. You can get us started any way you want. John, start us off. You're the young guy on the thing. Get us rolling.
My kids are 7 and under, so some of this may not apply. But one of the things that we're learning, none of this we've mastered. But one of the things that we're learning is don't expect in public what you haven't taught and trained and expected in private. And so being a director and traveling around to different churches, and if I don't, at my home church and in my home, if I'm not training them to obey me and to sit still in church, like that's hard for a little kid, for a 3-year-old to sit still as we're visiting different churches. Being polite to strangers, because I hated going to different churches when I was a kid, and we dragged them along with us. Those things, I need to think what's going to be hard for them and teach and train them. And the biggest thing I can do is teach them to obey. Now, that's sometimes actions and not a heart. Mm-hmm. But one fun thing for us is we have we called our pre-church visit Catechism. So about 10 minutes before we arrive at the church. So if someone comes up to you and says, "Hi, what's your name?" What do you say? Joshua. If they ask you what you like to do, what do you... Gideon's, I like to play with Legos. What grade are you in? And because and we have just said, you are part of our ministry, and when you show God's love to people, that really helps the ministry that God has called our family to. And then we'll turn around and praise them if they did a good job. We're leaving like, hey, you guys, you were so friendly, and you did such a... Daddy was talking for a long time after the service, and you just waited patiently, and that's part of love, showing God's love to people. So that's one of the things we're learning, but don't expect in public what you haven't taught, and expect it in private.
And one of the things that happens on that one is that sometimes in public it reveals, ooh, I have not taught that in private. And it's kind of like that little thing that, they're just acting as a child would act, and I need to now go home and start, not in the moment of the public moment, but to remember that and start working on it.
Don't go climbing onto their couch when we go visit someone's house. Okay, I guess I can't let them do that at home either.
Yeah, you did some of those
Well,
things.
we had learned the hard way on that one. And the funny that you brought up the couch, but when Hannah was little, I remember we were at someone's house, and she was just at that walking kind of new, maybe 1.5, 2, so it's kind of cute, and they're kind of walking across the couch to you, and it's cute and everything.
It's cute and safe, they fall.
Yeah, and you're right there. But we were visiting a home where they had a white couch. And Sam and I looked at each other like, this is a bad idea. But because we hadn't taught her that at home, now to try to teach her that in that spot wasn't a great spot to be teaching her that. So that's funny that you brought it up. But so we had to kind of go back and say, okay, that's a bad idea.
But before we would go to church, Cindy would have everybody lined up on the couch, like just sitting quietly, you know. And as an adult, you're like, oh man, the bar is set high, you know, because now I have to be quiet, you know, and sit right, and I can't fall asleep in church and stuff like that. But it's it is one of those things that sometimes setting those expectations almost puts a pressure on yourself as well, that I do those things. But I think it's a good kind of reminder, those pre-teaches. I know you weren't talking about it, but certain things are about to come up. Here's how you should act, and that reminder is really helpful.
Can I stick in one thing?
Huh?
So the one thing I like
You
to
can do anything you want.
All right. The one thing I like to say is just because there's a free meal at camp doesn't mean it's good for your children. So when you go 3 months, so in the summer times, we're allowed to eat all our meals at camp. Great, saves us money. But there's discipline problems at mealtime. I don't know about your children, but it just seemed to be an issue, whether they didn't want to eat their food or whether they were doing something wrong at the table. And if you put that off 3 months because you're like, we'll catch it at the end of the summer, we'll catch it at the end of the summer, you've just lost 3 months. And so what we would do is when we saw that behavior changing in the dining room, we would take all the little chickens back home. This is how we behave. So we eat at home for a few days. Now we can go back out in public. Oh, now we go back home and practice. But we also in that would decide at least 2 times a week we are eating at home. Because one, we couldn't talk to Sam at the dining room. And he might have to go back out, but it was specifically in the summer, it's going to cost us a little extra money, but we are going to choose to eat at home a couple times a week just to help our children not just be with people. We can't be with people constantly. It's not good for our family. And so that whole idea of, okay, let's have some family time and get to practice and all that. Anyway, that was my input.
I think also, like, just realize they are going to embarrass us. But I have to be careful my response to them. We're in public, and then all of a sudden my pride is responding to the fact that they did this thing. They're just a kid, and I may have to go discipline at a later point. But sometimes my response is wrong because of my pride, and they made us look bad at this church that we're trying to get to come to camp or whatever it may be. And there's more important things than that as I raise my kids.
Cool. Somebody else? What do you got?
I like what you're talking about, telling your kids that this is a ministry we're doing together. And I think together is one of those really important things that there's so many things that we get to do at camp that have some drawbacks, that you want to leverage the things that there's so many opportunities too. So if you get focused just on some of the drawbacks, you begin to forget the opportunities, and you have to say, how are we leveraging all of the opportunities of camp with the ministry that we have, and how are we helping them interpret life at camp in a way that glorifies God and really sees the blessings and work of God in a ministry setting. And so one of the things that we just learned to do is we're going to do a number of things together. So if I'm doing a heritage camp that we're practicing, man, my boys are who we were practicing on, and the different things, so they got to be a part of the practice. And we have pictures of them in the back of Jeeps with us, you know, building fires and doing things like that. And so Daddy does have to be gone at times, but there's a lot of times you get to come with Dad too, where other people don't get to do that. And so this idea of together in so many different ways. I like what Cindy said, you know, there's going to be certain times we're going to go home, we're going to be together, we're going to have intensive attention. And with us, that together has extended. We're so used to doing things together that even this last weekend when my daughter was buying a car, I'm calling to Santa Maria going, now what's the base price on these cars? And I'm actually in the thing because she's like, okay, Dad, how should I start? And so we started with prayer, and we did this 3-way, and my son was there with her. And so there's this together happening even though we're hundreds of miles apart.
You know, maybe several of you can comment on this. When do you decide when your kids should come with you, and when your kids shouldn't come with you? And I'll start with a couple of thoughts here. One of the things I did as they got older is that as I traveled, I thought to myself, I want to take a kid with me. And there was probably a, I don't know, 4 or 5 year section there where I was able to take my kids more with me, especially when I knew they could kind of take care of themselves for 2 or 3 hours without me. But I wanted to take my kids around camp with me here, but I found that my job didn't allow, like, there were so many confidential conversations that my kid couldn't come with me. So it's a joke in our house, but Bodie, I don't know, but he was how old when the Pepsi conference?
I don't know.
He's
It was
maybe
elementary.
6 or 7 years old. Somebody asked him what his dad did. He said, I don't know. He rides around in a Jeep and drinks Pepsi. And I'm like, I've never brought my little kid to work, but it's because people are coming up to me and telling me problems or dealing with situations, and I never know when it's coming, and I can't just say, go, like I'm not going to do my job well. So I found myself sometimes like, wow, some of the guys get to bring their kids with them quite a bit, and I didn't until they got older, and I found an option to do that. So anybody have any comment on when you do or when you wouldn't, or how you decided?
We started early, but we didn't get on airplanes. It was just driving to churches, driving to colleges. And I think they went with us when they were in a car seat, and we just took them and did. And so I can remember being on Bob Jones' campus, and my wife had to remind me that my 4-year-old was only 4 years old, because everything there, everything is ancient and breakable and that. And yet, on the other hand, they loved going to Northland, and a very sweet memory was my son, as all the students were filing out after lunch, and he's on the big rock singing, "My name is Patch the Pirate," and I said, and that was perfectly fine at Northland, and he could play. There was a playground there, all that kind of thing. And as a result of that, because they were with us, I don't know that there was ever a time that they weren't a part of what was going on and understood that this was for camp. And then in the matters of training, my dad, I don't ever remember my dad spanking me. My mother was a real swinger, but my dad never spanked
Remember,
me.
this makes it all around the
I know, they're gone. They're in heaven. They're here anyway. Okay. Yeah. But my dad taught me very early, and we worked to teach the kids very early, the power of which you stop what you're doing immediately, look at me, and usually that settles it down. And it doesn't have to be this threat. It just, they hear it. And I didn't realize how well I was being like my dad till I was at my brother's house, and out his sliding glass door, my son is fighting over who gets the wiffle ball bat with his cousin. And I just leaned back and tapped the glass. My son let go of the bat. And my brother looked at me and said, "How do you do that?" I said, "You start at 6 months. You start early. You have to put the effort in early, because if you wait until they're forming their own habits of what they're going to do, you're going to get left out." And so we started early, and Jim Berg did a session at one of those Bob Jones meetings where the preachers go, and he showed the 4 quadrants: high love, low discipline, high love. And it seemed like whatever quadrant, if it was high love, which, a lot of attention, a lot of hugs, even if you were a little bit too strict in discipline, the kids still usually would turn out well. So early on, when they were tiny, to give lots of hugs, lots of love, and it came naturally because I'm like my mother. In fact, I wanted to steal Atticus and Lydia this week, but I'm trying to be good, and I can't wait for the grandchild, and I don't care if they see that on video. But that constant. Now, when he got to be a teenager, that was totally different, and I went through the same thing with my son that I went through with my dad. When I turned 16, my dad was an idiot. He didn't know anything. And then all of a sudden, when I turned 22 or 23, my father got immensely wise. He was so smart. And now we're at the stage to have my son. He asked me to go with him to look at a car, and I knew nothing about them. But I was privileged that, he asked. And so I appreciate that. And I don't want to occupy too much, but there was one moment that I think was a pivotal moment when I said to my son, do you know why you shouldn't do that? And he looked up at me, he was probably 4 or 5, and he said, yes, Daddy, because you're a minister and it will make you and the camp look bad. Now, I couldn't let that go. That is not why something is wrong. It has to do with Jesus Christ and the testimony of Christ. And so that was a moment that thankfully I caught and didn't bypass. And I'm sure I missed a bunch of them. In fact, Debbie can list them for you probably. But it had to be all about God, not about my job or my reputation. And I think that's a hurdle sometimes you have to get over. And I have appreciated when I've seen pastors in the vestibule stop and make sure to calm the child down and make sure they understand the right and the wrong. And too many times I do see young guys who just want to quiet them down and move through. So that for me was the issue. But then they went with us, so they got to every Christian college every year for years and years. So when it came time to make a decision, they already had that pretty well figured out. They knew they were going to Christian college, and they've done fairly well.
Anybody else on the go with you, not go with you, when to stop?
You know, that changed on the age and the opportunity. So what's the context, right? And so sometimes paintball was a good time to bring the boys, and sometimes it really wasn't. You know, again, where's the staffing and how many and what are they expecting to be a part of? So I'm not going to be a good parent when I'm a program director, and I might be a really poor program director by bringing my son. So I have to say, what is it? How many? So you really do have to look at that. And there's sometimes it would be appropriate. We didn't do a lot like that, but later when we were invited to speak some places, and someone would ask about, would you share about your wife with multiple sclerosis and things like that? I learned that my daughter was really good in front of a camera, or in front of not a camera, but in a pulpit. And I began to bring her when we would share some of the testimony, because she really did help communicate the lessons that we learned. And so there's a number of different places when all of a sudden God's kind of like, hey, this is an appropriate place for your kids to share insight.
Cindy?
Yeah, I think that I did childcare for 27 years, so that was my job. So my kids were with me. But when you see other places, there are some places that just aren't safe for children. So to bring your child to certain areas at camp, when I watch moms get distracted, which we all do get distracted, that child can get hurt. So I think we just have to be very conscious of that isn't appropriate for some places. So when you're using a huge mixer in the kitchen, your 2, 3, 4-year-old, sometimes it's not the best place for them, because they could actually be injured in a very serious manner with some of the equipment that's in a camp kitchen. So you've got to keep that in consideration. Like I said, my job was daycare and childcare here at camp, and that was part of it if moms want to be involved. And the part of the reason was some places just aren't safe. Now that, like you said, there's age appropriate. There's times it's great to bring that child along, but you really have to, I would just say as moms, pay attention, because there's a lot of dangerous things at camp, and if you're just kind of getting distracted, it is easy for a child to get hurt.
If you would, I missed the last part of your statement.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have my
With
quiz
my-
out button available
With
for you.
my teens, once the boy got old enough to drive, because they were homeschool, they so loved being with their youth group. And so we were still going to so many churches to promote camp, but they could go to church because he could drive. Grandma and Grandpa would feed them lunch, and they could be with their youth group. And because they were homeschool and not in a regular school situation, there was a point at that stage that we didn't make them go with us, because they so wanted to be in their church with their youth group. And I feel like we've already, closed the circle. They're on the right path at that point, and that was a good thing to let them do.
Good. I'm gonna open it wide up. Any tips, things that you would say this was helpful in raising kids?
When push comes to shove, your kids shouldn't be the ones that are always shoved. And camp is the schedule is so consuming. And what we realized, especially as they got older, that there was other things that they, if it was a basketball league in the summer or a church youth group activity they wanted to be part of, or a friend's birthday party, we made the effort to get them there. And that was a lot of times driving 70 miles back to where, they went to school during the school year and connecting with their friends. And we just made that happen rather than, well, hey, we have another service. This is camp. This is another week. And the whole summer could be so consuming. And they loved 3 boys. It's a haven growing up at camp. But then there's some other things that they wanted to be part of and be involved in, and we made that happen.
It's good. Somebody else?
I heard a very wise man say about 15 to 17 years ago that you ought to be able to take the week right before camp starts to have a family vacation. That was you. And the first year we did a KOA campground and paid for it, then God provided a farming family that had a place on a lake. And that was very, very wise words, and I appreciate you taking the time to say that.
Well, what he's talking about there is a schedule here at our camp where we take a staff break the week before staff training, and we take a staff break the week after summer is over. It's the week plus the 2 weekends on both sides, and in family of camps they do it a little bit differently as to when it is and how it works, but it's basically a time before and a time after what I would consider your harvest time. It's the time where you're just going nonstop, and probably for the sanity of our relationship and our children, knowing that you had a staff break week before and knowing that there was a staff break week after, that even if people called to say, hey, can you run camp, can you do this, there were 4 weekends that were off the schedule, and it really was one of those things that allowed you to run a pace that had a finish line that then gave you a chance to recharge. And do you do a similar thing?
Yeah. We have a rental week just that 4th of July, and so that was our family vacation. I felt that I could walk away from the camp and assist in running that particular family or that rental week, and we did our family vacation out to Minnesota every year, and never regretted that, and that was a highlight as they look back over the years that Dad took off and he left camp, and it was all about them for a week and something really special, and no regrets with that at all.
Cindy?
Along those lines, Sam and I had to say no to extended family because our extended family would say, oh, you're off that week, let's all come.
You have a break.
And that's hard to say no to your extended family. But we also knew that for our children's sake, many times it had to be just our family. And one note I'm going to add on that is when our kids were in high school, and I finally told Sam, I said, when there's a problem at camp, like there's a problem with a college kid, I mean, Sam's to the rescue, you know what I mean? He's there, he's all in. I said, I just want to know if my kid is having trouble in school, can I interrupt you from camp and get you? And it happened a couple times, and he said yes. And I said, okay. Because I was trying to keep the kids.
And that was the right answer.
No, but I wanted to know as a wife, is I need rescued too. Like, I don't mean that in a selfish way. I mean that sometimes it's beyond I don't know how to deal with this. I want to be able just to say, hey, this is an emergency. I need you. And it happened a couple of times where Sam took the kid, went to town, dealt with the issue, and spent several hours saying, okay, let's figure out what this is, because my kids need to know that. They need to know that Dad's going to come to the rescue, in the sense that when we're going through something, whatever big it is, that he's. You get what I'm saying on that?
And Cindy's question there made me sit down with all of especially our leadership team, and let them know, look, raising teens is messy. And because you want to give them, you can get obedience if you just demand it. But I don't want to just have obedience and kind of skate through the teenage years. I would like to know what their heart is. And to know what their heart is, I got to let them make decisions. And so for all of your camps, those teen years, if you have staff with teens, it's messy because the mistakes that teens are making are bigger. Like there's more stuff happening there, and so it was helpful for me to kind of intentionally say, yeah, of course I would. But she brings it to mind, like, okay, that's the decision I would make, and then in my kind of planning mode, I'm like, okay, guys, I have kids, which means at some point, that someday, I'm just going to have to bail, and I'm going to have to say, I have a family emergency that's going to take, I don't know, an hour, a day, a week. It might take a month, because like that's your commitment. Like, what would you do if? Well, this is what I would do, and you just have to be willing to say, yeah, I would do that if the.
And you're not
need
gonna always
arose.
catch it, but there's just
Yeah.
times, because when they're little, I'm trying to I would give Sam information like, oh, if this is happening, we need to work on this. But as they get older, it's like, it's more than just here's information. This is like, we need to really deal with this and not, we're dealing with stuff all along, but the problems get bigger and so, anyway, that was my little,
Yeah, so Bodie, we're talking about you.
There was another one, so the anticipation, the finish line, whenever you're pushing and you know the finish line's there, it's easier to finish well.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
kick hard, yeah.
And so doing that, and so creative scheduling was really important for us, where we sat down with a calendar and we said, these are the times we're gonna do special things along the way. And if the kids are out of school, this is when I'm gonna float my holiday, this is when I'm gonna do these things. That was really important. And then, and that was something we had to do, and if they knew that finish line was there, that was great. The other thing was that actually, again, my boss here at camp, Sam, said to me, he says, I want you to help me know how I get you home with a quarter tank of gas to get you through the rest of the night. So one of the things that he forced me to think about, how do you get home not on empty? And you have to think about, how do I get home with some still to go and not the empty light on, and you have an evening yet to give and enjoy your family.
And I believe you probably get to come home on empty once a week. You know what I mean?
Probably.
Like that probably happens every now and then. But if it's every day, man, that's a miserable life for kids, wife, and you. I mean, it's such a joy to have something left in the evening with your kids and family. That's good. Somebody else?
One of the things we found traveling to go, particularly counselor recruitment, you're going by places that you can take a 2 or 3 day extension, and then that helps the kids know I'm not just being dragged to a college, but in our case, going to Bob Jones, we're going to hit Dollywood or things there in Pigeon Forge, and it doesn't take that much, and the mileage is already underwritten by the camp, so you might as well enjoy the stay while you're there. And the nice part was, when you're doing counselor recruitment, sometimes where you're going, those are the cheapest hotel days you're ever going to be able to find. So it's worth it to do that. We also, about the time the kids were elementary, 8 and 5 or 9 and 6, we just had to stop on our camp ends on Friday night. You could sit and keep talking to staff members and do the camaraderie thing and go till 10, 11 o'clock, because there are people who are there that are from out of state and they're going to be up till midnight on Friday night anyway. At least that's what we tell them. They'd stay up till, they may be up later, but we just said, okay, it's 8 o'clock, camp's supposed to be over, jump in the back of the car, let's go. We went to Dairy Queen, because all week we've been ministering. Now it's time for mom and dad and the kids, and then it's worthwhile to spend that time with your kids, because nobody seems to remember that they're walking in the girls' dorm and the guys' dorm and around the campground, and that's when you really find out what's going on at camp, because they hear things and they know things, and they can be your eyes and ears. And then in the process of that, they also begin to learn more and more about the ministry and why you have to do things certain ways, or why this one didn't come back this year, or that type of thing. But without that information time, sometimes I think you said they get pushed too far back, and you just need that kind of time. And then there came a point when they were even a little older, we would work with the other staff family and a couple of the older ones that were there on summer staff, and say, okay, Wednesday afternoon, I don't have any responsibility for any particular program thing, we're going somewhere. I'll be close enough if you have to call. There was a county park preserve not far away, or we'll be at the house. But we'd take 3 hours and we'd call it our afternoon, or we'd take an evening and just say, we're not gonna be at camp this evening, and take that time off and be with the kids. Then when my kids got to be 16, they didn't want to do any of that stuff because they wanted to stick around and do the camaraderie and talk to all the staff people, and they didn't want to go home, they didn't want to go to Dairy Queen, but they didn't mind if the old people went to Dairy Queen, and that was okay. And we would train
Cindy, and then John, I'm going to just get one of yours. Go ahead, Cindy.
I didn't read what your questions were, so I don't know if I'm still on the track.
You just
I'm
say
assuming.
whatever you want.
When we were, well, I know, I was like, everybody's got paper. I'm sitting here going, I need to something. No. But on the family time, what helps Sam and I, and I'm guessing husbands and wives in the room this would help somebody. When we first started into camp work, it was stressful for me to be like, no end to it. Like there was no, he was like always going to be out. There was always another camp. There was always something. And it wasn't until we decided we're going to sit down every 3 months and we're going to look at the schedule. And he would say, okay, this camp's going to be really busy, but we could go out here. This camp's going to be really busy, but we can go out here. Okay, this is going to be a busy month, and we can go out here. We started writing all those dates down, and that was like this lights on.
Yeah.
Oh, we have this plan. So it helped me get through the rough times. And then the other one was, as our children got older, they would say, Dad never spends time with us. And I'd say, I'd have a calendar on the fridge. Wait a minute here. Dad did this, this, and this. And we have this, this, and this coming. Oh, okay. But it kind of takes away that fuzz of, we never do anything fun, or, it's always camp. We're never doing anything. And so it helped me, and I don't know how many people do that, but it was a huge help.
You're cheating, dear. Schedule
See,
your
I
family
didn't-
team
you didn't
at the
give me-
beginning of the season. Don't wait till the last minute.
Well, that was my
I got
point.
nothing. I got nothing.
Gene, can I go sit with you? I need to go sit with Gene over there. Sorry.
Okay,
I'm
Want
John.
some of
sorry.
mine, Cindy?
Not what you're saying.
There's good one.
Go ahead, John.
This has been alluded to a couple times, but mine says little kids because that's what I work with right now. But I can imagine that this is all the way through the years. But kids have big ears, and they don't. For me, I don't feel like my kids need to have all the burdens of ministry that I, as a director, I as a leader, am dealing with. And the problem is, like, I'm working through this thing all day, and I get home, and I want to talk to my wife about it, and my kids are right there, and I have one, he's little Mr. Nosy, and so your voices get quieter, and all of a sudden, he's, like, right there.
And he's quiet.
Yeah, he's really good. I'm like,
And good.
we are talking. Like, so, like, I just have to wait until they're in bed, or, like, all right, there's been times... Daddy needs to talk about something with Mom right now, and you guys going in your room, and you're just gonna stay there until we say you can come out, and really? No. But that's our responsibility as parents to bear the weight, and I didn't add this in my introduction, but I'm a camp kid, so my folks worked at a camp for 25 years, and that's where I grew up, and I think I only have in my memory one person that my parents I ever remember them saying anything negative, and they were on a very large staff, and I'm like, I hope my kids could only remember that from me, but we just thought camp was great.
I think that's so important because your kids do not know how to deal with that information,
Right.
and then they don't hear the resolution of it because
Right.
you had that conversation in private somewhere else. So they're just kind of stuck with this information that's never resolved, and
Yeah, I've heard staff kids tell me something, and I'm like, why do you even know that?
Yeah.
Like, how did you get that information? But I also know we have a kid who could hear, I don't know where they
superhero. Yeah.
I'm like, how did they even hear that? So, they do have ears.
we sent a couple staff members home a couple years ago, and my kids were like, so where's so and so? And I'm like, oh, they just went home early, and that's all they needed to know.
Yeah.
And they're young enough, like, oh, okay, but even if they're old enough, that's all you need to know. Don't worry about it.
Now I will say, with when situations would happen, family devotions would every now and then be a story that didn't have any names, but the whole situation was good enough that I wanted my kids to learn something.
But as they got older, they're like, well, something must happen.
Yeah.
No names were mentioned, but we can only guess. No.
But as they get older, older, they're more
Yeah, then
aware
they're-
of those
yeah,
things, and
those are helpful.
I'm
Yep.
assuming that they may need more details.
Good.
Yeah, I want to protect my coworkers' ability to minister to my kids. And if I'm talking about conflicts, they're going to get an attitude, and now they've lost the opportunity to do the work in my kids' lives
Yeah.
that they need to have.
And
that's
then
really
their
important.
attitude is picked up by the staff member,
Yeah.
and now that person isn't able to serve in camp because of that attitude that
Yeah.
I could be to blame for that.
Yeah.
Brian, you got one?
Jean made mention of this.
Gene. These are Gene's words.
Well, and she said, Scripture says a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. I'm glad the father isn't mentioned in that. And, but I mean, there would be, we had certain rules for the kids that, because they'd get up and they would go. They'd be with the speaker's kids, they would be with the full-time staff, they would be with the summer staff. They would hook up with different cabins, and so like we made them report in at meals, so we knew that they were still alive. and then they had the evening service, and they'd always have the campfire, and there were certain things that they just had to be at. But very thankful for all the people that invested in them, all the staff that spoke into them, and in many ways there was more than enough eyes watching them, and we found out all sorts of things about our sons as as the different staffers or whatever would come. But we also realized at times there was things being spoken into them that we don't agree with that, and realized we are still their parent, and they needed to be respectful and polite to everyone and so forth, but there was certain rules and there were certain expectations as our family and what we shared with them and that they needed to follow. So
I grew up as a staff kid as well, and there were a few things I did as a staff kid that I wasn't necessarily proud of. A number of practical jokes that there are many rules here at Ironwood about now. But I did a number of practical jokes that my parents never knew about, and I remember one time thinking to myself, I need to share, like they need to know this at some point that I did this. So I decided to make it an illustration and a message. That way, when I shared the thing, they could not like immediately react to it. So I remember that message where I preach, and I'm looking at my dad, and then I tell the story, and then I'm kind of peeking over to look at my dad, and I'm glad I chose that moment because I'm preaching, I'm doing the work, but that goes back to that. Our kids need us right there. So we're gonna run out of time. Let's click down the line and just do some fast, maybe some.
Can I do something quick to
some
Brian's?
quick ones. Yep.
We ended up hiring a babysitter because my wife had to be over the kitchen, and at any emergency I had to be like this. And so that young lady or that young man knew they were responsible for our kids at that moment. And thankfully God gave us, by and large, really sharp young people who they continue to be friends with my kids to this day.
Yeah, good babysitting I think is a tool that you want to use well, and I think you should pay them and take care of them and not just assume on their
Right.
goodness. I think those are things that it's the money well spent for the family. Some quick ones, just.
We're a unique family, and because of the way that God has made us with the unique needs in our family, we're going to work together, and that sometimes means some of the things that everybody else is doing, we can't do.
Yeah, I embrace the bubble. I like the fact that my kids lived in a bubble. I did not want the magnifying glass that fried you, and so you got to figure out the difference. The bubble is one that everybody knows what's going on, and they're going to hold you accountable. The magnifying glass is trying to inflict hurt on something that's magnifying in their lives. And for me, I like the bubble. I like living in a bubble. It's helpful for me in the child training. Don't put the magnifying. Don't be trying to burn my children by looking so hard that you're just looking for that fault. Somebody else? Yep, go ahead.
I would be careful to, when you're living next to each other, there's usually more than one staff kid, that you can't compare, and that is very important, that you are an individual family and you make those decisions, and you don't judge another family for how little or how much that woman works or doesn't work. how they raise their kids, and that is that bubble. And then I would say, give your other staff members space for their children to do wrong. Not saying to say it's okay to do wrong. What I'm saying is give space that they are going to do wrong and help them through it. Don't be so harsh on them. Does that make sense? Like, you still need to correct sin, but you don't need to sit there and say, you know better, how dare you do that? What kind of, and our kids have been approached like that in the past, not always, but at times. And I think I tend to do that. You were raised here. You should know better. And I think we have to be really careful with one another's children to treat them like God's created them, and we need to treat them that way.
I think something life-changing for me growing up that my father did, which was the example for me, which I'm grateful for, is we as a parent will make mistakes, we will mess up, we will sin against our kids, and to be the person that we need to be, the Christian that we need to be, to ask our kids to forgive them. And if it, as little kids, I remember several times as a teenager, and with my kids as teenagers, and they'll still speak of that. Where Dad admitted he was wrong, he asked, their forgiveness, and cried on their shoulder and hugged them, and they never forgot that. Because that, we'll all do that, and that was life-changing for us.
I never want my kids to use my position as a leverage against other staff members, against friends. And so the moment, if I ever heard that my kids were like, well, my dad's the director, boy, that was not something we ever wanted to hear. My position does not give them any entitlement there. Anybody else?
I would say repeatedly share with your kids your love for the ministry and what God is doing. Like, I see it all the time, I'm like, this gift came in and this happened and this happened. But they don't see that. They see that Dad's gone a lot. And share what God is doing with them. And I would say for those of you that are the wives that are home, like, you have a huge impact on your kids' view of the ministry. And I praise God for my wife, who is always talking about, this is so neat what God has called us to do, even though Daddy's out tonight.
Yeah.
And if my wife is all grumbling, what do you think my kids are going to think about having their dad be out at night serving campers?
I did not find out until my child was a teenager that the boys in camp, staff boys who were frustrated with me, took it out on him by dunking him constantly in the pool. I did not know that.
Yeah. There's a number of things that we're like, oh, we just heard that, and I think what you take away from it is there is a pressure that you don't see. So you just have to know that it's out there. Know that you might not see it, but it's out there. So it's something worth talking about.
In a place where there's a number of kids in your camp thing, I really appreciated the traditions that they did at times. So there would be, hey, let's go down and do paddleboarding, and there were some really neat things. We're going to do soccer here. We're going to do football on these days, and we really tried to allow that to happen and let that flow. That was good. Also, when we traveled and we had 30 minutes to town and stuff like that, we would use that time to prep them and pray and stuff. And some of the things, like, we would say, okay, let's look for the favor of God in our day. And so we would pray for the favor of God, and I would describe the favor of God is the uncommon good that God puts in my path today.
Yeah, I don't know how many we've gotten. We've thrown out, 20 or so good ideas. I'm open to 3 or 4 from the audience. We didn't give you as much time as I thought. We are a verbose bunch. But anybody got a tip, something that's helpful in raising kids? And if we can pop them out there, we'll do a couple minutes worth. So who's first? Jean, do you have anything to say? There she is, scooting down her seat. She just should have been up here. Go ahead.
We did for 24 years, we've been doing kids in camp, and we've always done them before and after summer camp. And we've decided in the past 5 or 6 years, summer you go out and do something, and then fall trip you go and just poop.
Yeah.
That's your move after summer, and try to do all your Disneyland and all that spring and fall. get ready for school.
Cindy was so good to me because, like, for the first 3 or 4 days, I am just comatose. I mean, it's just, I am no good. But by day 5 or 6, I'm starting and I'm ready to do something. So that break day, some of it was just to be ready to do something at the end of the week. Good. Somebody else?
I was going to say quickly, we made an agreement with our kids when we have to eat at other people's homes. You're thankful for whatever you're served. Eat a little of it. There's a McDonald's or a Burger King on the way home.
That's really good advice. That's
That's a good point.
I wish I had
That might have helped us a few
Oh
times.
man, we were at one. Okay, I can't tell that story.
They're still around.
Somebody
Right,
else.
they're still alive. Okay, anybody else?
Sam, I liked one of the things that you did where you took the camp kids and helped them create program activities. So every now and then said, this is what we're gonna do. And so the paintball course where our kids had trucks on tractors and they were actually building a course. And so a major part of some of the things we did were actually designed by our kids.
Yeah, the whole pygmy, the paintball course. I mean, and I fundraised based on the pygmies would like to have a job, and I can pay them if we can build this thing. And donors just, okay, what do you need? I mean, it was like they wanted to help the staff kids, and it was a really cool thing. And we do pygmy camp too for the kids every other year. There's a pygmy camp that we just do for the pygmies, and we can do some stuff you can't ever do with normal campers, and that was really fun.
In that, your staff kids are going to have arguments. So you have to know how to deal with them. So Scott and our kids for 6 months, Sierra talks about it in one of her books. They didn't talk to each other, and we were like, "You've got to figure." It was over something dumb, and the kids were just like, the siblings were like, "We're not going to talk to them," and then they tell each other, "We're not going to talk to you." But it kind of lasted like 6 months. Like, we need to deal with this. So as parents, we can't get mad at each other. So I can't take on my kid's thing and be mad. And so you're sitting there.
But he is family. We could do it.
But you know what I'm saying? You
We had
so
to be
you
good back then.
yeah. So you kind of have to let them work it out, but in the same breath, you have to encourage them to work it out. And they did work it out, but it was at that point where, okay, we're going to need to bring everybody in and work it out. And it was over something dumb. But you have to know that there is going to be kids' arguments, and you have to be careful about letting that control your feelings about another staff member, because that is very dangerous.
Did I see a hand over here? It's going to be the last one. Yep, go
I
ahead.
just raised mine. I don't know if you remember this. It stuck with me from when I was here 10 years ago as a wrangler. But I remember Bodie took a liking to me as one of the wranglers. And I remember this day Sam came to me and says, "Jeremy, you need to go for a ride with me in your Jeep," or in his Jeep. And he said, "You never know who your kids are going to like." And he said, "My son likes you. He's watching you. Don't mess up," basically. That meant so much to me, and I'm already watching my daughter. She's only 3, but there's already staff girls that she likes more than others. And going to them and saying, "Hey, remember, these kids are watching you. Watch what you're doing," because that meant so much to me.
So Bodie, Hannah, Sierra, and Cheyenne, sorry if we said something that we shouldn't have. To the audience, sorry, when I handed it over to you, we kept on talking, kept on going. But it is the hope of this one. Remember, there's 60 kids, 60 souls right here, 60 folks that get to sit on the front line of what God does in amazing ways. This is rats. This is a group that I want to minister to as much or more than any group. They're with me all the time, and what a blessing, what a privilege.